All right, great. Thanks everyone for attending. I'm going to talk a little bit about coronavirus stigmatization and psychological distress among ethno-racial minority groups in the U.S., really focusing on people of Asian descent. So I'm kind of representing work that I did with some other collaborators, Gordon Sen, Chun-Sen Liu, and Jenny Shi. And we have no conflicts of interest or relationships to disclose. So disease stigmatization among people of Asian descent in the US kind of go back. This first it's happened in the early 20th century. There were outbreaks of plague that is believed to come from China and spread to San Francisco and the West Coast. And there were incidents of stigmatization back then. And then later on in the early 21st century, there was the SARS outbreak that happened in southern China and spread it to North America, primarily in Toronto. And so it's nothing really totally new, disease-associated stigmatization of Asians in the US. This here is a photo of intentional fires that had been set to homes in Honolulu in Chinatown in an effort to control the bubonic plague outbreak. In the process, though, several thousand residents in the Chinatown there were displaced. So it's just a very, very brief background of some previous disease stigmatizations in the US associated with Asians. And so now this year in 2020, of course, the outbreak of COVID-19, Asians in the United States are reporting more experiences with racist and racially insensitive comments and experiences compared to before the coronavirus outbreak. And this is some results done by the Pew Research Center. So rising anti-China and anti-Asian sentiments have been widely acknowledged by think tank groups and government organizations as well. We know that stigma can also lead to psychological distress. So stigma, if we think of it as an attribute that's deeply discrediting, that reduces someone from a whole, right, to some who is tainted and discounted. And exposure to enacted, so stigma that can be observed and perceived stigma can elevate stress and psychological distress. And so there's been some evidence that SARS stigmatization in the early 2000s was associated with greater psychological distress. And so coronavirus stigmatization also may have some implications for social identity threats. So US-born Asians are often mistaken to be foreign or less American, and then it goes along with this idea of a perpetual immigrant, even from their second generation onward. And so experiencing coronavirus stigmatization may be perceived as a threat to the social identity of US-born Asians. And there's been evidence to show that perceiving these threats to American identity among US-born Asians is also associated with poor psychological well-being. And so we conducted an analysis with a few hypotheses. First is that Asians are at greater risk of coronavirus stigmatization compared to non-Hispanic whites. The second is that coronavirus stigmatization is associated with psychological distress. And the third, that the magnitude of association between coronavirus stigmatization and psychological distress is stronger for US-born Asians compared to non-Hispanic whites. We use the Understanding America survey, which is coordinated by the USC Center, nationally representative sample of adults in the US over 18 with sampling weights. The survey was fielded between March 10th and the 31st of this year. And a little over 3% was excluded due to missing covariance variables. And our final sample size was 6,707. We measured psychological distress with the PHQ-4. This is just 4 items, 2 pertaining to depression symptomology and to anxiety. And the scores ranged from 0 to 12. And individuals who had a score of 6 or over would be identified here as having psychological distress symptom. Coronavirus stigma experience was measured as whether or not the participant had experienced one of these following because someone thought they had the coronavirus, thinking that they had been treated with less courtesy and respect, receiving poor service at restaurants or stores, causing other people to be afraid of the participant and received threats or harassment. So we did logistic regression in Stata. We controlled for age, sex, education, income, state, using face masks and coughing symptoms. Probably running out of money, being ordered by doctors, stay away, actual diagnosis of SARS-CoV-2, and in order to stay away. So our first hypothesis was supported by the results here. So these on the left-hand side is a predicted probability of reporting any coronavirus stigma experience, non-Hispanic whites here. And then we have Asian foreign-born here, and then Asian US-born there. So significantly more likely to experience coronavirus stigma compared to non-Hispanic whites. So these results recently accepted in Ethnicity and Health, so that should come out next month if you're interested in more details there. So our second hypothesis was also supported. So folks who had reported any coronavirus stigma experience had significantly higher predicted probabilities of psychological distress. There was marginally significant different results for males and females, only marginally. It was a little stronger apparently among males though. So our second hypothesis there was supported. Interestingly, for our third hypothesis, now I know my time's coming up soon now, so I'm gonna eat into the Q&A if you don't mind.
That's okay.
So for psychological distress, this is broken up by males and females. We did an interaction. And so here is the predicted probability of the psychological distress among male, non-Hispanic whites who did not report any coronavirus stigma experience. And here it is among that same group who did report coronavirus stigma experience. And we found that among males that that magnitude of association among Asian, foreign-born Asian males and US-born Asian males was not significantly different than the magnitude of association among the non-Hispanic white males. So, however, when we look at the females, there was one finding that stuck out, and that is among US-born Asian females, that magnitude of association was markedly stronger than among non-Hispanic white females there. So here is the non-Hispanic white female who did and did not report coronavirus stigma experience. And here is the same for Asian US-born females there. So we have that conditionally supports our third hypothesis. Some limitations: we didn't have specific data on among ethnic data among Asians, and we didn't have age of migration data. Minors were excluded, and the survey was only conducted in English and Spanish. So it seems like Asians in the US are at greater risk of coronavirus stigmatization. I think that really surprises anyone here in the audience. And it's associated with psychological distress, and it seems particularly pronounced among Asian females born in the United States. And we also noticed that Blacks and Hispanics also have an elevated risk of experiencing coronavirus stigmatization. And so we're recommending some more maybe monitoring and interventions there in the future. These are some references, and happy to take any questions.